Hello, everyone, and welcome to this event where we'll be talking about the Middle Corridor Initiative, and we'll be looking at the Central Asian, South Caucasus, and Middle Eastern countries that are intended to be part of the corridor, and how this initiative is perceived there. So we'll be focusing on the transit countries, if you like, rather than China. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lubica Polakova, and I'm with the Russia and Eurasia team here at Chatham House. And I'm delighted to welcome today's panel in alphabetical order: Galip Dalai, Consulting Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Program here at Chatham House; Kasim Khan Kaparov, Dean of Economics and Finance at Alma-Ata University in Almaty, Kazakhstan; Neil Quilliam, Associate Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Program here at Chatham House; and Ambassador Natalie Savanadze, Senior Fellow with the Russia and Eurasia Program at Chatham House. So the main focus of today's session is, how real is this initiative? We hear a lot of talk about it, but what is actually behind it, and what is happening? How much work has been done? What are the key infrastructural and political challenges? What are the positions of key players? And what does the initiative mean for China's influence in Central Asia and the South Caucasus specifically? So our panelists will offer brief initial remarks, and then we'll move to the Q&A. So please, could you use the Q&A function to ask your questions, and I'll do my best to cover as many of them as possible. And before we start, just a reminder that the discussion is on the record and being recorded, and we might be releasing the video later. And as we are on the record, you're welcome to share insights and comments from the event on the social media platform of your choice. So that's it from me for now. And I will invite Natalie to share her thoughts first on how the initiative is looking from the South Caucasus and in the South Caucasus. Natalie, please, the floor is yours. And you're muted. Please unmute yourself. Thank you.
There we go. Yeah. Thank you, Lubica. It's very nice to be part of this discussion. So I will offer some general remarks, basically focusing on the perspective of the South Caucasus. And, there is a reason why we're talking about the Middle Corridor now, is that because there is a lot of hype about it. Russia's war on Ukraine and the sanctions imposed on Russia has made the northern route, which connected China to Europe, it has made it less reliable and politically more risky. Hence the renewed interest in the alternative routes. And this geopolitical situation seems to be making, seems to be the best opportunity for the Middle Corridor, which is a project that actually has been in the making for more than 2 decades, but never really quite made it. But now there seems to be a rare confluence of interests, China, EU, and the states in between. So I would like to structure my initial remarks along sort of 3 main questions. What the Middle Corridor could do, in other words, what our hopes and expectations are, what it really does at the moment, what is the capacity, and what is it likely to do in the future, in other words, prospects. And if I can summarize from the very beginning, it is my impression that there is a growing mismatch between expectations and reality. And if you mix into this a good dose of regional and global politics, the prospects also begin to dim. But let's begin with hopes and expectations. First of all, Middle Corridor has some advantages. It's shorter, it's cleaner, and it bypasses Russia. So this is why mostly people are interested in it. Shorter, it's substantially shorter. So we're talking about saving about 2,500 kilometers, which is a ride between Astana, Almaty, and back. So in theory, it should take, to transport goods from East Asia to Europe, it should take about 12 days. While the northern route provides 19 days. So it is hoped that the development or realization of the full potential of this corridor will really transform Eurasian trade, will boost regional cooperation, economic development, regional integration, and may even solve the conflicts along the way. And I was talking before coming here, I was talking to a representative of Azerbaijan, which is a country very much invested in this project. And he mentioned the term corridor of peace. So it has also, they're beginning to brand this as an opportunity to develop peace in the region. And in some ways, it echoes the initiative of the Prime Minister Pashinyan about the crossroads of peace. So basically, unlocking transit potential of the region and putting it to a good use to promote peaceful relations between countries that have been plagued by the conflict for a very long time. So in principle, the people I was talking to on the Azerbaijani side were open to Armenia's involvement in various connectivity projects. And I would expect that this is something EU would very much favor. And Armenia also sees it as highly advantageous. Again, this is expressed in this initiative on the crossroads of peace, but of course there has to be certain conditions met, and that is mainly the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Armenia needs to be respected. So there is some potential there. In terms of, another conflict that has plagued the region is between Georgia and Russia. At the moment, there is a clear rapprochement between the two, and Georgia is also trying very hard to position itself as the kind of logistics hub, as the transit country. This requires stability. So for the current leadership, the mantra is peace and maintenance of stability, not least in order to fulfill this vision. There's been an activation of diplomatic efforts with Central Asian countries from the side of Georgia. It's rushing basically to complete East-West Highway, which has considerable Chinese investment, and also building a bypass on the north-south road, which is environmentally rather dodgy, but it will ease the congestions on the border. So you could say that there is a clear incentive to kind of de-escalate tensions from the side of Russia. So these transport opportunities, or the linked to corridor, one may see a correlation between these kind of opportunities developing in the region and attempts to de-escalate tensions between Russia and Georgia. There is clearly no political solution in sight, but there is an incentive at least to keep it stably frozen, if we may say so. In terms of economic development and regional cooperation, there needs to be considerable investment in infrastructure, and that's something that everybody realizes. And some of these countries are doing. I mentioned Georgia. Azerbaijan is also investing in expanding ports. There is quite a bit of cooperation traditionally between Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. It's quite structured cooperation. And now with the middle corridor, you have Kazakhstan also adding to this. And I see there could be incentives as a result of if we're talking about expectations and the middle corridor takes off, I could see the possibility of the two regions, Central Asia and South Caucasus, sort of drawing together. And interestingly enough, one analyst from Carnegie has observed that these countries are also converging in terms of their foreign policy outlooks. They're all pursuing more and more multi-vector foreign policy. Georgia used to be an exception, which had, very stubbornly pro-Western foreign policy, but that is changing now with its outreach to China and kind of rapprochement with Russia. So there is also an opportunity for green transition, because this is much cleaner to develop, less emissions, and also to develop better soft infrastructure. Now, if we come to the reality and what is really happening, we can say that one of the biggest achievements in the past 20 years was the opening of the Baku-Tbilisi-Ars railway. And that has started working quite actively now. I mean, the first trains, I think, went in 2020, but now in the context of the Ukraine war, it's being used more effectively. There's been an agreement between the four countries to increase the throughput along the entire section of the middle corridor to 10 million tons. At the moment, it's, I think, around 3.2. But if you keep this into perspective, this is only 10% of the northern route and the capacity of the northern route, which also has a very well-developed infrastructure, services, and on the way, it goes through important industrial and population centers, so in Russia and Belarus, that adds cargo and basically defrays costs. So there are issues of geography. There's issues of the fact that it goes through several different countries. They all have different railway systems that are outdated. They all have different customs policies. So this will require a lot of harmonization and coordination, and maybe even some innovative ideas like having a joint board and so on. It's plagued with bottlenecks, and we know that on the Caspian there are a lot of bottlenecks, and one of the reasons why Azerbaijan is investing in expanding the ports capacity there. But the problem also is that the waters in the Caspian are going down and down. So how much deeper and bigger can you get when you're losing water? And it's also very difficult to navigate in the summer because they tend to be quite rough. Georgian ports are underdeveloped. They're small. There is a lot of investment going in Poti and Batumi. What is needed is deep sea port, and Georgia was supposed to build the deep sea port in Anaklia. It kind of became victim of domestic politics. We can talk about it later. Now there is take two to build that port, and the state investment, well, at least the plan is that the state will have 51% share and the rest is soliciting private investments. So politically, I think it might be very difficult to really meet the expectations given the capacity and where we are now without a strong external push. And where this push is going to come, one option is China, which is looking interested, increasingly interested, maybe make this, they want to be interested to make it part of their Belt and Road Initiative. This, of course, will not be welcomed neither by United States, nor particularly by the EU. I don't see much interest from the United States at the moment in developing this, even though they do mention that, you know, connectivity is important and diversification of routes. But here politics is, there's too much politics. There's too much regional politics that makes things difficult. EU has its own global gateway project and is more invested in this idea. It's cooperating with Azerbaijan, but we also have to see that after the last war in Nagorno-Karabakh, relations between EU and Azerbaijan have been cooling. Armenia-Azerbaijan issue is still very much there. There is Zangezur corridor question, which is still there. And finally, I want to conclude with the question, how much really Russia bypassing is it going to do? Because Russia is still very present in Central Asia, and for the EU, absolutely, there is a great interest to develop links with Central Asia and allow them to balance between Russia and China. But Putin was there in Kazakhstan just last week. They are trying to keep that presence going. There's a lot of trade between Russia and Turkey, and these connections would probably benefit that trade as well. And we'll have to see what will be the relationship between Russia and China, and whether China will go against, for instance, something that Russia doesn't want. But ultimately, the question is how sustainable that is, because as I said, it will require a lot of investments, particularly in the weak links, which is, for instance, Georgia with its railway and port system that needs to be modernized, and also in Azerbaijan. And if the circumstances change, because it is right now very sort of relevant given the situation, but if the circumstances change, will it stay relevant still? and will it merit the kind of long-term investment that it requires? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Galip, over to you. How does the Middle Corridor Initiative look from Turkey, and what does it mean for Turkey?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And probably I would be starting by saying, like, you know, almost I agree with everything that Natalie has said, and therefore, like, we can go to third speakers, but I will still have to like speak in my slot. So the rationale of this middle corridor from Turkey's point of view is quite obvious, and one obviously is, you know, now there is this idea of regional economic connectivity is quite fashionable across the world, not only in South Caucasus, Central Asia, Turkey. I mean, we see this, like Neil knows the Middle East very well. This is like also a talk in the a talk of the town in the Middle East, almost in every region. So the idea of the regional economic connectivity is very, very attractive one for everyone. Secondly, the Turkey actually following the end of the Cold War, that was one of the central idea that many Turkish officials had, that, you know, instead of being seen as being at the periphery of Europe or at the periphery of the Asia, now that the global economic and technological processes are going to actually facilitate the integration of these two regions more and more, Turkey all of a sudden will become at the center of these two integrated regions. If the Europe and Asia are going to be more integrated through trade links, through technological links, through economic links, now Turkey, instead of being seen as being at the periphery of the either side, it will be actually at the center of this emerging Euro-Asian space. So that was another very tempting reason. Another element, you know, when we talk about this middle corridor, I mean, you know, the big topic is the fact that this will connect China and Europe, and it affects, it offers, in a sense, the most economical or the shortest route, as Natalie said. You know, when you compare to the northern route now, both in terms of the distance, but also in terms of the geopolitical risk associated with the northern route, given the fact that significant chunk of it goes through the Russia and Belarus, the countries that are sanctioned by the West as a result of the invasion, and also given the length that the southern or the maritime route that has to follow. So economically, that makes more sense for connecting, in a sense, logically, for connection of the China and Europe. But for Turkey, this is also a very subtle way of connecting more with the Turkic world. I mean, most of the countries, obviously, that are part of this middle corridor are countries of the Turkic world. And this is like, in a sense, you know, a connection within the context of another larger connection. The connectivity, the trade, economic, political connectivity, increasing such terms of the connectivity among the countries of the Turkish-speaking or Turkic-speaking countries. And obviously, this is politically, ideologically, economically, sentimentally is very attractive. The idea of interconnection or creating more connection with the Turkic world has always been quite appealing, and this idea is actually recently gaining further currency or prominence in Turkish foreign and domestic politics. For quite a long time, actually, there was more consciousness among the Central Asian countries, or the countries that are regarded as the Turkic countries, because of their concern about what the implication of such closeness with Turkey vis-a-vis their relation with Russia, China, or even for some Iran. But now the emerging global context, Turkey believes, actually also offers a good context for these countries to be hedging their options when it comes to Russia, China, and also better or more conducive environment for engaging with Turkey. And now you see actually renewed interest in the idea of the connectivity of the Turkic world through different means, and you see also more visibility of the subject in Turkey, both at political, economic, and foreign policy level. Thus far, the success, particularly when it comes to looking at the Turkey side of the story, has been mixed. You have, some point of successes, some points of the incomplete works. I mean, the most obvious one, as what Natalie said, now the Baku-Tbilisi and the Kars Railway project is complete. There is also the other connection points that is very much relevant for the middle corridor, which is, you know, the Yavuz Sultan Selim Bridge in Istanbul, or the Marmara Tunnel. This is the only undersea tunnel that connects, in a sense, you know, the area or space between London and China. You have the Eurasia, Avrasya Tüneli, Eurasia Tunnel also being completed in Turkey. But also, when you look at this discussion, you see also another problem or another question, the China question. In a sense, on the one hand, China is the motivation of this project, but on the other hand, there is a China question, and for China, there is a Turkey question. Because in the end, you know, there is the China-Turkey relationship still remain undefined. On the one hand, obviously, economically or logically, this middle corridor makes sense, and therefore that there is an economic logic of closer engagement, closer cooperation between Turkey and China. But on the other hand, there is geopolitics and politics that you cannot escape. The politics, in spite of Turkey being extremely silent, extremely reticent on what's happening in Uyghur question, China knows there is a sizable Uyghur population in Turkey, and that will always put pressure domestically. That will always be a factor in Turkey-Chinese relationship. So there is a big political question, even though less discussed, even though less focused now, but structurally, strategically, there is this question that can come to the fore anytime. Secondly, at the end of the day, despite all the crises that we are seeing in Turkish-Western relationship, Turkey remains a NATO country. And when it comes to engagement with China in sensitive technologies, in strategic infrastructure projects, there will always be a big question mark over there. And China learned this in one way or another by its recent experiments with Turkey. In 2015, there was supposed to be a defense deal with China, which fell apart at the last moments and then there was also the idea of China building the Turkish third power plant that also really still didn't materialize much. So there is sensitivity that is not talked about, but that is there. At the end of the day, as I mentioned, Turkey is a NATO country. That in itself will put a constraints, as we also see with the with Turkey-Russian relationship, the fact that, you know, the S-400 missile that Turkey bought from Russia caused one of the deepest rift in its relation with the US. So there will always be sensitivity when it comes to Turkey's engagement in strategic infrastructure project and sensitive technologies in Turkish-Chinese relationship, and that is at trouble. Another point, you also have a Western question or the European question, because despite the increased interest in this project, still, when you put the things in perspective against, and Natalie rightly said, this is still much less than 10% of what the northern route is doing, and obviously much less than what the maritime route is doing in terms of delivering the cargoes or goods from you know, China, Eurasia to Europe. So that is still, you know, a modest. We have to see this as modest, right? And the level of interest from Europe still remains to be modest, despite, like, you know, this revived interest, etc. The level of interest from Europe is modest, and also associated with is the level of investment or potential investment in such big things from Europe remains modest at best, if not less than expected. But also the Russia question is still there, because in the end, the Russia question, this is, you know, one idea of this is bypassing Russia, or as much as possible. The question is obvious: can it bypass Russia? That still remains a valid question, even though geographically you can speak that it still bypass Russia, but like almost many countries has quite intricate and close relationship with Russia. And if it does, if Russia says this is, you know, a project that is premised on the logic of bypassing, hence confining Russia, how will Russia respond to this? Given the intricate relationship of all these countries with Russia, the Turkey will obviously will factor Russia question in all the time. Last discussed but not less important is also for Turkey, there's Iran question. Particularly when you talk about, like, you know, how actually integrate Armenia into the question, Zengezur corridor. So you have also the Iran question that needs to be sorted out in one way or another. And I think the final 2 points are as follows. What is this? I mean, we're talking about the Middle East corridor. Is it a corridor? It is an idea of regional building effort. It is like, creating an economic space or economic zone. So what is it? Is it just a transit route? Is it like a region building effort? Because all of them point to different things. I think right now, these questions remain unaddressed. On the one hand, it's a corridor that also have the aspiration that it will build the block for some form of creation of a regional economic zones. But when you look at the real content of it, it's not there. It's nowhere there. So it still looks essentially or effectively just a corridor. So the question of what is it still has not been addressed yet, because if it is just a corridor, it means different things. If it is like a region building process, it means different things. I think that needs to be clarified as well. And then the very final points is there is, to some extent, if this is going to turn into a region building economic process, I think there is some kind of mismatches there. You have China that is a major in industrializing and exporting power. You have, Europe, which is quite a mature market, etc. On many levels, it's becoming post-industrial. So therefore, the question of the supply chains is quite a fundamental one for it. And you have the countries in between with a different picture of the, presence in the global production chains. And I think there is a mismatch there that will also have impact. So is this going to be mainly a corridor that will bring China to Europe through this region, or the region going to be an active participant of the creation of an regional economic zones, which will also have its own industrial base independent of China, for which the connectivity with the European or the intra-region market is very crucial. I think this question still remains unanswered.
Great, thank you, Galip. I guess the next question is then who gets to decide and who gets to define it.
I think Neil or Kasim.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you very much, Galip. So I think we'll go to Kasim Khan next, and he can tell us a bit more about how the situation looks in Kazakhstan and Central Asia more broadly.
Thank you. Let me also structure my talk in 2 points. So first, I would talk about the viability of this corridor and its importance, or what is the real impact that it could have. And the other topic that I want to touch upon, that also Galip has already mentioned, is what's the importance of this route in terms of region building and how can it impact the Central Asia. So on the first point, well, there are already some driving forces behind this project. So it helps us to be a bit more optimistic about the investment opportunities alongside. And there is an existing demand in terms of trade between China and the European Union, and we saw that this demand is increasing. So the last year, the transit through Kazakhstan was around 23 million tons, but this year it already increased by 20%. So we see that the demand is there, and for the middle corridor, the numbers are also increasing, but comparing to maybe the current route and especially comparing to maritime route, it's still small numbers. So we need to be realistic about the capacity of this project. And right now, if the transit volume is around, the factual transit volume is around 3 million tons, and on the best case upside, we're talking about 10 million tons, which is still quite small portion of the total trade. But on the good side is that this route is economically viable, and that the local railroad operator in Kazakhstan is actually making good money out of it, and the revenue of Kazakhstan Temir annual revenue is more than $1 billion just from the transit route. And of course, for the company, it's a very good argument to continue investing and expanding into these route capacities, especially along on the border with China, where there is a project to expand current dry port and build a new one. Then more on the investment side, just a week ago there was given a start to the railroad junction called Jetegen, which will allow the railroad to go that now goes through Almaty, but it will be like a road to bypass Almaty, and by that it will save 2 days of traveling for the goods along this road. This junction will be completed, is planned to be completed by 2025. So in a bit more than 1 year, which is also quite a good speed. And we see that, of course, this road needs a lot of investment alongside to optimize it, but we are already seeing that these kind of investments are materializing. Another one good news for this route development was announced in Tbilisi on Silk Road Forum. So the 3 countries, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Kazakhstan, the major railroad operators, they signed a deal to establish a company, a joint venture called Middle Corridor Multimodal Limited, which will be based in AIFC, Astana International Finance Center, and basically will also help to smooth the operations along the transit route. So we see all these incrementally, not so big, but improvements along the road, and that could tell us that there is already some results, even though only 1.5 years passed that this route became the darling of all the countries in the region, but there are already some investment and decisions made. And of course, we see the more interest coming from China and Turkey to expand this route and to put it on the political agenda whenever there is a meeting in China for Central Asia leaders, for example, or meeting in Turkey. We see that this topic is one of the most discussed, and the political will is there. So there are also some interesting developments that we see. For example, the re-export of goods from Georgia and like cars from Georgia via Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan to Russia. We see that this year the growth was like 1,000%, and it's a business opportunity which is being utilized through this development of this route, and before that we didn't have that. And to add to Natalie's comment that it's not only Putin probably who visited Kazakhstan, but it was also Macron, and then President Tokayev visited Germany, where he met his counterpart, Chancellor of Germany. So there is a strong interest in on the side of the European Union, as far as I see, and it's more of a like long-term vision for the development of this project, rather than we shouldn't be waiting for the volume to triple or to grow tenfold. And on the second point, I see that this middle corridor, from the Central Asian viewpoint, this should be seen as an opportunity to link the otherwise landlocked region to the global market. And we see that countries in Central Asia, the leadership is starting to see that opportunity and appreciate it. And we see that Uzbekistan is quite active because it's a double landlocked country with a very strong production potential, with a growing population. The whole Central Asian region is has the highest growing rhythm right now. That the highest the population is growing fastest in the world. So it's also a very vibrant region. The total GDP of Central Asia is 350 billion. And what is most interesting is that half of this GDP is trade turnover. So it's a very open region and open economy, except for Turkmenistan probably, but the rest of the region is quite open to trade. But still, the dependency, the number one trading partner for the region is Russia, is 21%, but on par is China, or with a 20%. So in my viewpoint, the implication of the development of Middle Corridor and in its current view, and maybe in the future when it will develop further, is that the trade turnover with China and Europe would increase for the region, and the trade with Russia probably will remain the same or decline. And that's one of the factors we should also take into account. And there is recent research that I did on business integration shows that the large companies in Central Asia, they don't have much presence in the region. For example, out of top 100 companies in Kazakhstan, only 10 companies had presence in Kyrgyzstan, and only 13 companies had presence in Uzbekistan. And Tajikistan and Turkmenistan presence is even smaller. So that gives a sense that the region itself is not interconnected. There's still many opportunities, and the Middle Corridor for the leadership of this region should be seen as a good opportunity to attract investment that would otherwise wouldn't come into the region, and use this investment to connect these countries with each other. Of course, there is a big political factor involved, and we see that the Central Asia started to work to develop regional viewpoint, and to have meetings with big partners, not on bilateral level but as a regional bloc, and we see that this approach is working. And in future, probably one of the models for Central Asia, it could be ASEAN countries, which unite large but different countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, and Indonesia, and the rest. And for Central Asia, that could be one of the positive externalities, let's say, of the current situation and the Middle Corridor opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Kazakhstan. And finally, Neil, Russia is not the only country that the transit initiatives want to avoid, or say they want to avoid. Iran is another one, or is often mentioned as another one. So can you tell us how the Gulf countries look at this whole Middle Corridor initiative?
Sure, I will. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak on this panel. I was just thinking, it's like one of those films when you've been invited to a wedding, you open the door and you go into the wrong wedding. But it's a great place to be, so I really want to stay and have this conversation. It's, you know, I spent a good few days really trying to sort of understand where MENA states, and by that, in this context, I mean the Gulf states, and primarily I mean the Emirates and Saudi Arabia, you know, where they fit, how they view, you know, the Middle Corridor. And I came to a very quick kind of conclusion, is that I'm not sure that they have an interest in the corridor as such, or they're sort of invested politically in the corridor as such. However, there is tremendous interest in Central Asia, and I'm going to sort of just identify kind of 4 key points really that will sort of illustrate or illuminate that. So in terms of the questions that that we're trying to address, I think the point I want to be able to answer is, what are the positions of the key players? And I'm not sure even that the Gulf states are key players. So I would just really limit it to what are the positions of these players. Before I get into that, there were just some great words that have come out, and each one of you have said. Gallup, talked about connectivity, of course, and that's something that's very familiar. Natalie talked about multi-vector foreign policy, so that really came through. Kazim Khan talked about diversification, and these are all kind of buzzwords in the Gulf. So these all resonate very, very well. And the other thing for me, from a Gulf state perspective, is sort of projecting power. So the interest in the middle corridor, as I said, I don't think there's a sort of a collective interest in that. I don't think there's a real sense of perhaps what it is, or that the Gulf states want to make this happen. But for a long time, Saudi and the Emirates, the other Gulf states too, but Saudi Arabia and the Emirates have really sort of looked beyond their immediate neighborhood, and they've looked to sort of the backyard, and that's very much where Central Asia sits. And it's those countries have really sought to deepen and diversify their relationships with Central Asia. Part of that is to sort of build influence in the region against Iran. So Iran is a key point of where their interests lie. It's about buffering the influence of Iran. It's about taking the competition out of the Gulf and playing it in Central Asia. It's very close to home in the Gulf. Now we can say that the Saudis and the Iranians, they've de-escalated, they've re-established diplomatic relations, so that could soften. But I think long term, if we go back, if we look at some of the investments, if we look at some of the soft power plays taking place, particularly in Kazakhstan and in Turkmenistan, you can see that the Gulf states are investing as part of a broader political play to outmaneuver Iranian influence, if you like. Secondly, they've been investing quite big. I think Mubadala has sort of taken positions in very, very large chemical complexes, has invested downstream. There are a number of JVs throughout Central Asia. They've also invested sort of in the broader energy sphere. And this is very much in line with their interests in cultivating, in developing, deepening, and sustaining the hydrocarbon economies. They need to continue to invest in that space. Obviously, the markets have been shifting eastwards for the last 15, 20 years, and it forms part of that. So you can see what I'm saying is that these investments, this perspective, this view of where the middle corridor lies, is not about the middle corridor. It's about a host of other factors. But the middle corridor may offer opportunities. Gulf states are cash rich. PIF is making significant and large investments. We've seen that in Turkmenistan. So their sovereign wealth funds are very well predisposed to take positions, and they are in fact investing in their own countries, but also in Central Asia, in other regions, specifically in logistics, transport, ports, agriculture, food security, and all those things sort of tick the boxes of what the middle corridor is. So all these kind of openings are potentially there for the Middle East states or for the Gulf states to sort of take their opportunities and invest. Ports are massively important, particularly to the Emirates, with DP World, with AD ports, taking very large positions again. And this is part of their hub and spoke strategy to build out and to invest, co-invest in ports all around the world, around those maritime routes, right? And again, across Central Asia. So it's part of that. It's also part of, again, cash rich, high oil prices sustained over some time, very I don't want aggressive, but I don't mean in an unpleasant or in a polite way, but aggressive sovereign wealth funds that are really looking for high returns, or looking for long returns but high returns on their investments. They shifted their focus. They're still very much invested in North America, but they're shifting their focus elsewhere. So they are looking for these opportunities that are coming up. Again, not part of some kind of composite grand strategy or plan that would be the corridor, but if there are facets or features where those investments make sense, where the returns look good, then they're going to be investing into that. And that very much fits in with the Gulf states' push towards diversification. They need to diversify. They have to diversify away from the hydrocarbon economies. But where are they going? They're going to hydrocarbon economies. They're trying to sustain that hydrocarbon piece whilst developing back at home, the renewables piece, clean energies. But this very much kind of forms part of that. They don't want to annoy the Russians. It's all about balancing at the end of the day. It's they've taken very interesting positions on Russia, Ukraine. They sit in a place where they feel themselves that they're being pulled by the US away from China. They're being pulled by the US away from Russia. They want to, they want a multi-vector foreign policy where they can work with all those states. They know where the parameters are with the US, but they want to have good relations. They got good relations with Russia. They want to continue to invest in Russia. Obviously, they got tremendous relations or strong relations with China. BRI is a key component of that. So again, whilst they will be investing in Central Asia or in what might look like the corridor, there's no way that they want to be doing that to frustrate or annoy the Russians. I think that's probably where I'm going to leave it for now. So I would say that, from the Middle East perspective or from the Gulf perspective, these are there are opportunities that may open up for investment. We're likely to see, I could list some of the investments that have taken place over the last 10 years. There are 200 Emirati companies in Kazakhstan, apparently. So there is this strong activity, but I don't think any of that is guided or shifted by a grand plan to create a corridor that's going to link, China to Europe. I just think that's just coincidental. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very interesting. So you actually brought us to a question I wanted to go move towards, and that's on investment. Who's willing to put money behind this initiative? Because so far, I personally haven't heard that much about it. And you said something very interesting about, okay, so there is investment from Gulf countries, but not specifically for this grand plan, but more towards business initiatives that are viable for them or bring influence to them. Now, there's a question in the Q&A list about how can the EU utilize its global gateway initiative, and again, like how can the transit countries between China and the EU avoid or manage the fact that if the investment comes from China and they're trying to balance their foreign policy and not to become too dependent. How do they manage the situation? So first of all, if we take the EU angle, someone mentioned that Macron so France and Germany mentioned stepped up their engagement in Central Asia, but is it more in symbolic terms, or is there any actual economic investment there? Kasim Khan, maybe you're the person to talk about that. How much real investment rather than symbolic engagement is there from the EU side?
I think we are still anticipating the real investment from the EU side. We seen some of the news that was coming from these high level meetings. One was related to the production of energy and EU's investment into energy sector in Kazakhstan and the region. And we see that some of the German and European companies are planning or already investing in Uzbekistan, for example, to move their production or to establish the production there. But on a global scale of things, of course, these are just preliminary projects, and they're not the ones that's going to shift the balance in the region. On the other hand, we still have Turkey, who is much more interested in the region, and we're starting to see real investments coming from Turkey. In terms of Kazakhstan, it's the largest airport in the country, in Almaty, for example. We also see that Chinese investments is becoming even more active with, and Kazakhstan is now just a week ago, 2 weeks ago, we are now having this visa-free regime with China. So basically 30 days for citizens of China to visit Kazakhstan and vice versa. And all these developments, they're not that big, maybe on its own, but when you put them together, it's something that you can see the pattern. And the Chinese investments were part of the deal for this route which bypasses Almaty. I'm not sure what was the final deal, but I know that there were talks and there was an interest from Chinese investors to be part of these long-term infrastructure development projects in the region. And of course, there is a special interest of China in the region because of the BRI project, because as we know, Belt and Road Initiative, the road part is exactly the route to Europe. So it hasn't gone anywhere, and China needs it to diversify its trading routes. So from this point of view, I think that number one would be the possible investor is China, then Turkey, and European Union is yet to materialize. But Middle East countries, I see that they're becoming more active in the region, especially in Kazakhstan. Maybe they started to. Kazakhstan is becoming more interesting for investors from Qatar, for example, Saudi Arabia as well. United Arab Emirates always has been like we can call it a bridge between the Middle East and Central Asia. So the role of Middle East is increasing, but I think that as this route develops, we will see not only the investment, like direct infrastructure investment, but also the investment into other sectors as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So Galip, maybe you could tell us a little about Turkey's investment, because Turkey itself is quite actively seeking FDI for itself. So how much power can it put behind these initiatives?
Sure. No, I think that's a very good question. I mean, obviously, as Kasım has rightly put out, Turkey has been very active or interested in the Central Asia, particularly in certain countries, and have been very much engaged in the infrastructure projects or the economic projects in places, most importantly, probably Kazakhstan. So in this regard, yes, Turkey is very interested and will continue to be interested, and in terms of investment wise, because this is an investment with good return. So this is like investment that is paying off. Kazakhstan is the case in point. If you look at the almost all big Turkish construction company, the top one, almost all of them are either currently present in Kazakhstan or have been present in Kazakhstan. So therefore, there is a very strong connection between the Central Asia post-Soviet space. I mean, all these terms I know are loaded, but more importantly, like Kazakhstan and the interest of Turkish construction company. But obviously, these projects are massive projects, the Middle Corridor, and that Turkey can only meet a fraction of, can only undertake a fraction of this investment with the current economic pictures. Probably it will be even more difficult. So given that the country is itself experiencing quite significant an economic downturn, and it is also trying to attract investment internationally as much as possible. So therefore, yes, there is interest. Yes, there will be appetite, but that will be limited. And that's why I said this project has two questions. One of them China question, but another one is the Western or European question. To what extent we will see the interest, incentive, or appetite from the European countries to invest in this project? Because I think without the money coming from there, this project in itself will remain without such international investment. This project will remain quite significantly underutilized or unrealized on many levels. And secondly, the China question, against the question of investment. To what extent China is ready and willing to invest in this one? Again, like it's not an economic decision; it's geopolitics or political decision at the same time. We saw this very clearly when the Turkey now has this high-speed rail project, and it wanted to get the Chinese on board between Kars and Edirne. It wants to get the Chinese to finance it. But Turkey was not willing to give the project to the Chinese companies. But the Chinese, had a condition. So the only way for the China that is going to put money in there, if it is the Chinese company that undertakes it. So there's all these very, not only economic, all the strategic, geopolitical question that you have to address for this to happen. And obviously, Turkey was very wary to award the whole contract to the Chinese companies. So, and that is why, and the Gulf part, the Neil put it very rightly, very briefly on it. I think the Gulf is not interested in grand things. It's interested in functional or defined things that pays off. There's this misperception about the Gulf money. I'm coming from a country that also has very much misperception of it. The Gulf countries are extremely savvy when it comes to where to invest. They're not throwing money around. So they're looking for projects that pays off, the projects that they will get good return from. So therefore, yes, we see an increase in of the interest, but the increase in interest will be very skeptical of any grand thinking or talking, given that there is a significant and severe geopolitical, systemic risk that are very much intertwined with the Middle Corridor. The geopolitical risk both emanates from the region itself, because we have seen such a series of instability in different regional countries that is always going to bedevil this project. The geopolitical risk also involves how China, Iran, and Russia is going to perceive this, as well as the US is going to perceive this project. And particularly if we see further intensification of what is many dubbed as a systemic rivalry, what will be the implication of it on this project itself? Because in the end, this project, once again, actually increases the Chinese role in the global, the supply chains, the chains processes. This is contrary to this logic that is gaining more traction at the Western level, in a sense, to reducing dependency on China. This is not like a dependency reduction on China. So all these factors are intertwined, and that's why I think the major problem of this Middle Corridor is I still don't see enough investment. Not only actual investment, I don't see enough appetite of investment from the countries or actors that can potentially put money into it.
Thank you, Galip. And yes, we obviously we'll move to conflict in a second. But yeah, so we've covered the kind of financial side of things. John Roberts has a very good question. He's asking, okay, so if we put aside, maybe there's not enough investment, but is it possible that removing some of the red tape and tariff barriers between the countries would actually be more helpful? Natalie, maybe you could start on that.
Look, potentially, absolutely. I think, in fact, the interest, and I started by saying, like, there is a kind of confluence of interest. The interest of countries that are involved in Middle Corridor is to harmonize their customs procedures, digitalize it, and remove that red tape. I mean, customs are notoriously corrupt agencies along this route. We know it, right? So there should be some innovative solutions to this, because that is one of the biggest obstacles that creates bottlenecks, that reduces the speed. And the route, any trade route, is as good as it can deliver goods in time and quickly, right? And that's an issue. So I think there is a potential in the idea of Middle Corridor that could stimulate some positive developments, including the kind of development of soft infrastructure. There was also discussion about maybe using blockchain for payments to avoid the currency fluctuations, creating an overall steering board to manage this whole process with the private sector involved, etc. But these are ideas. And as Galip said, the politics of it and the politics of the whole region really dampens the appetite for investment. And if I can say a couple words about the European Union and its global gateway, well, in fact, the EU has been reaching out and seemed to be quite interested in developing ties, or again, in the context of the war on Ukraine. EU has always been concerned with the diversification of both supply and routes, particularly when it comes to energy, because we know Russia is weaponizing energy quite effectively. So there was a visit of von der Leyen to Azerbaijan. And there was an agreement which is quite important, I think, in the context of the Middle Corridor, to develop this underwater electricity transmission cable that goes through Georgia and the Black Sea and will bring Azerbaijani green electricity. And Georgia is also quite keen to contribute its hydro power and export it to the EU. So what the EU can do is precisely kind of stimulate more green approach, transparency, different types of engagement. But I don't see this being a priority within the global gateway. And also, I mean, that route can be interesting apart from the political question of reducing dependency on China. It can, in theory, be interesting if you have the other way direction, right? We're only talking about China from China going to the EU, but it can also be used to go the other way, right? And there is, less discussion, and it seems to be like a less opportunities there. The EU has also been extending the TNT network in the South Caucasus of the roads, so that's something quite interesting. But most importantly, I think one thing that really comes out of this discussion is that none of these countries along the route are actually interested in bad relations with Russia. And the main interest from the side of the EU and the West would be, okay, well, we need to isolate Russia and bypass it. And there, I think there is a bit of a mismatch politically.
Okay, thank you. Kazakhstan, maybe you could say more about how how much scope there is for removing, non-financial barriers in Central Asia.
Yes, I already mentioned that just a month ago, 3 countries has established joint venture, and it's done by the railroad companies. So the trade is a good business, especially for the region which have not been like in the spotlight of big countries, big markets. now is a window of opportunity for the region, for the railroad companies, and I think they understand it, and they are now using all the means, to decrease the cost, to speed up the transit, to increase the volumes, because for them it's pure business logic. So despite that they're being a state companies, like in case of Kazakhstan, they're very much business oriented, and they know how to calculate the revenue. So I think it's a good opportunity and good match between business logic, the underlying economics of it, and the political will, not only within the region, but maybe more importantly from such big powers like China and the European Union. And we see that I saw there is a question about the conflicts, and just let me start that this opportunity is actually, we see that major powers, they try to I don't know, maybe they are these counterbalance that would actually stop some of the long-lasting conflict in the region, because the trade for China and for Europe is much more important than some of the local conflicts and the logic of these conflicts in different parts of the region. Will it be Central Asia, Afghanistan, or Caucasus? So the momentum is there, the underlying economics is there, and I think that the non-tariff barriers would be the easiest one to solve, and we're going to see more of them being streamlined, and through all the means of digitalization of payments and some project funding for large infrastructure, probably utilizing maybe some direct funding from global institutions such as Chinese development banks or European Investment Bank or the consortium of various investments. And I think that at this point, investments in Central Asia would be seen as one of the big opportunities for even for outside investors, like the one mentioned in the comment section, which is a Indonesian sovereign wealth fund. I see that maybe that would be one of the decision points when such new investors could be introduced to the region.
Thank you. Now, Natalie, back to you on specifically on the conflict in the South Caucasus. So obviously we have all followed the news most recently around the Armenia-Azerbaijan peace talks following the Azerbaijani offensive in Karabakh a few months ago. So yeah, I mean, this is not the first time connectivity is mentioned as a kind of a cure for conflict. So given what we've been talking about, how much muscle there is or isn't behind connectivity initiatives in the region, what do you think they mean for this particular conflict and for other conflicts in the South Caucasus? Can they or is there impetus?
Look, I think it does provide incentive, because the countries involved see that this can bring revenue, it can bring some benefits. And if, you mentioned Armenia, Azerbaijan, in the case of Armenia, this is one way to kind of stop Armenia's isolation from all the connectivity projects that have been happening. So there is, and there must be, a particular interest from Armenia to join in. And the situation has really changed dramatically since the events you mentioned. There is no more Nagorno-Karabakh. There's been an exodus of the population, and there's been a de facto completely restoration of Azerbaijan territorial integrity. So the starting point now is quite different. And I think there can be a new impetus for various projects to be developed, but it is obviously pending on the peace agreement, and that is not looking very easily, easily reachable, because well, I mean, there is a question now where it's going to be, who will mediate, which platform. I mean, there's a lot of disagreements. Armenia, and there is this question of Zangezur corridor, which I think is one segment which can definitely benefit Armenia. It can benefit Azerbaijan and the entire Middle Corridor kind of concept. But this is a very sensitive issue, right? And there is this agreement from the 2020 that sort of says that Russian, again, going back to the question of bypassing Russia, actually there is in writing an agreement that says that Russian border guard should control this segment. Now, Armenian officials today say that, well, that agreement was relevant in the context of reciprocity with the Lachin corridor, right, which is no longer relevant. So a lot of the provisions of this agreement are no longer relevant, and in any way, their interpretation of this provision was not control, in a sense that Russian border guards will be standing along the route, but a kind of monitoring function at the entry-exit points, but the rest will be controlled by Armenia. So this is something that will definitely have to be negotiated. Now, it's also interesting, and I think in the long run, I can see Armenia becoming involved because in various routes, because it does provide some of the shortest connections, not least through Mehri. And if the railroad there is rehabilitated, that should be Turkey's interest as well. Also to develop Armenian branch in case there is some kind of tensions on the Georgia-Russia side, which is never you can never have guarantees against that. So that kind of is a good insurance policy. But, obviously, it's not a recipe for the solution. I mean, they're mutually dependent. You need certain stability for the connectivity to work, but then once you have it, the opportunities that come with it create incentives to sustain stability and security. But it will also bring a certain realignment. I mean, Georgia has in some ways benefited from the Armenia's isolation and positioned itself as the main route. So once there are alternatives, Georgia will also have to reconsider and have different options. And here, the question of actually developing economic integration and cooperation within the region, with the states in between is quite important, because being only transit dependent is not the most sustainable economic policy.
Okay, thank you. Galip, anything to add on the South Caucasus conflict situation?
I think right now, what I see, there is quite significant interest, particularly what I see from Ankara. And also you saw to normalize the relation with Armenia. And I think the presence of Pashinyan has been extremely fruitful. Like Pashinyan, his approach has been, I think, extremely helpful. So in this regard, if there is, some progress there, that obviously the atmosphere that will significantly induce a new atmosphere in the Caucasus. So at this stage, this interest or these talks, because both Turkey, Armenia, etc., appointed special envoys for such processes. Unfortunately, we haven't seen any concrete progress yet. But the narrative, the climate, the intention seems to be more positive when you compare to a few years ago. Because as long as the question of how to configure the place of Armenia in all of these different initiatives that we're talking, that will always makes these initiatives lacking one leg in a sense, and making them a bit more tenuous, so to speak, because you have also the Iran question that will be coming into picture much more forcefully. So in a sense, to finding an accommodation with Armenia is actually one way of like also reducing the capacity of the Iran's meddling or the Iran's intervention in the process, because let's not forget that recently the South Caucasus has been actually a place where the position of actors like Turkey, Russia, Iran within this regional context has been redefined following the last few years. So this is like an unsettled space. So the accommodation on Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan is key for these initiatives to have a bit better prospect, and maybe also to get more Western interest or European interest in the subjects, because given that this is one of the subjects probably that is dampening the appetite at the European level.
Great, thank you. So we only have a few minutes left, so I would like to conclude by focusing on the question you have all raised and give you a bit more space for that. So we have talked about the middle corridor being seen as an initiative that could help the transit countries reorient their foreign policy. And I'm just thinking, most of you said that no one wants to worsen their relations with Russia at the moment, although they are willing to improve their relations with the other actors. So I think that's a really interesting question. So I would like to ask you, maybe, how do you see relations with Russia changing? In the countries you talked about, so Central Asia, South Caucasus, Turkey, Gulf countries. How have they changed in the past 2 years since the war started? Maybe not only on the political, but on the on the kind of infrastructural level. Is there investment in kind of furthering or deepening the kind of hardwiring with Russia? I mean, I see Stefan Meister has asked about Georgian cooperation with Russia on infrastructure, with Russia being part of the bid on Anaklia. So that's one question, and then a final one for me is there. So we have mentioned several sort of confluence of interests, several types of confluence of interests. So I would like to ask you if you see any interesting confluences emerging. So any interesting groupings in the region, groupings of interest, what that bring different actors together that perhaps we haven't seen before. What kind of groupings or alliances should we be watching out for or keeping in mind when we analyze the region? Thank you. So maybe this time, Neil, you have been quiet for a very long time, so we'll start with you.
Thank you. So I'll answer your first question on Russia and the Gulf states. I mean, we've seen sort of in the Middle East region, and we've seen certainly with the Gulf states over the past decade, a shift in foreign policy approaches. The Gulf states, in particular, Qatar, Emirates, Saudi too, less so the other players, become very assertive foreign policy actors, and we've seen them, projecting their power where they can, or where they thought it's going to serve their national interests, and they've tried to sort of insert themselves as well into complex diplomatic processes. So we see Qatar holding the hands of the US and Afghanistan. We see them playing a key role at the moment in the release of hostages and prisoners between Israel and Hamas. The way I look at it in terms of Russia is that Saudi, Qatar, and the Emirates want the US to always have their back. That is their primary security partner. That's the underlying assumption. But they want to have that multi-vector dimension to their relationship. They want to have that trade relationship with China. They want to have their difficult relationship, but broadly positive relationship with Russia. You know, we've seen the Saudis sort of stepping in to sort of Russia, Ukraine through diplomatic processes, getting hostages released. So they very much kind of want to do this dance with Russia, sort of keep them close, keep them on side. But the most important relationship, make no doubt about it, is Uncle Sam, who's got their back. That's what they really want. But they want, but they do want their cake and eat it. They do want to have this relationship with Russia. Obviously, there's the investment from the Saudi side has been going in. There's the OPEC plus arrangement, a little bit under stress at the moment, but their interests on the energy front broadly aligned. So I would say that we've gone from a position, say 10 years ago, where the Gulf states were 98% aligned with the US. They're now 95% aligned with the US. I mean, 95%. So it hasn't changed that much. It feels like it's changed a lot. But they want to have this, what they see as a valuable relationship with Russia, and there's no way they want to cut those ties. So that's kind of how I would characterize.
Okay, thank you. So maybe we'll do this in the reverse order from what we had at the start. So Kasim Khan, I'll call on you next.
Okay, thank you. Well, answering the first question on the role of Russia in its participation in the economy of Kazakhstan, is it growing or not? I can definitely say that it's growing. We are now seeing that the first wave was just people moving and running from mobilization, for example, but now we see that businesses are being established, and I guess the easiest way to move company from Russia is now to Kazakhstan, and there were around 4,000 new companies established in Kazakhstan, which originated from Russia. So basically, we see a booming investment from Russia to Kazakhstan. I cannot define it by any particular area. They are across the board, and I would say that with the development of middle corridor and as a concept to bypass Russia, the irony could be that there will be some portion of Russian investments actually going into these projects to bypass Russia, and that would be interesting development, but it would be a very pragmatic approach, practical approach, because Russia is not going anywhere, and the border of Kazakhstan and Russia is not going anywhere. It's the longest in the world. It's comparable to US and Canada. So what the current changes in dynamics, in geopolitical dynamics, I mean, they provide some opportunities, but I think the leadership in Kazakhstan and in general in Central Asia, they understand that the influence of Russia, though it may decrease, but still it will be one of the most influential partners in the region. As for your second question about new possible blocks or new players who can become more active in the region, I would point maybe on two actors. One is Afghanistan. I think that official of Afghan delegation went to Russia. They had talks. They also came to Kazakhstan and they had official talks with the Ministry of Foreign Trade. So we see that the trade can be a very good incentive for Afghan government to become more responsible player in the region, at least as a trading partner. And this provides an opportunity for the region itself. And the other one is, I think that more intensive ties, economic ties between Kazakhstan and Caucasus, namely Azerbaijan and Georgia. There were economic ties before. There were Kazakh investments in Georgia, for example, but still we see that there is big potential, and the middle corridor could actually be one of these backbones to direct this investment and joint project, and maybe to establish some sort of bilateral trade agreements among these three countries. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Galip, you next.
I think what happens in Russia's relation with these countries, and in this case, Turkey, what happens is as important as what doesn't happen. And probably even what doesn't happen is more important at this stage. Like since the war, I think what is glaring is not what's happening. What is glaring, what's not happening. What's not happening, we see more consciousness from the Ankara side towards Russia's geopolitical revisionism and ambition, even though Turkey strives to maintain very good relations, but at the end, the Russians' geopolitical revisionism in its surrounding era is posing a direct geopolitical and security risk long term. And secondly, we have not seen another Turkey-Russian engagement in defense industry in the form that we have seen with the S-400 missile system, which, as I mentioned earlier, was one of the sources of deepest tension in Turkish NATO-Turkey-US relationship. So we see the both sides still strive to maintain functional relationship or issue-based cooperations, good relationship. But I think there will be more consciousness from Turkey side that this issue, the cooperation, will remain short of going into strategic and defense industry cooperation. That was a major issue. Secondly, I think the geography matters, and because when you look at Turkish-Russian relationship, it has different picture in Middle East, Mediterranean, or North Africa than it has in, so to speak, the post-Soviet space or Central Asia or Caucasus. In the Middle East, most importantly, we saw through the crisis or conflict zones like Syria and Libya, Russia was very willing, very open to work with Turkey in a structured manner, because the Russian-Turkish engagement or cooperation came at the expense of the Western influence there. In Syria, in Libya, because the Russian, Turkish, and Iranian trilateral framework in the form of the Astana process has proved to be more consequential in charting the course of the Syrian crisis than the UN-led Geneva process in which the Western actors were the primary actors. But when you look at the post-Soviet space, this is like where I see more tension, friction to come to the fore, because an increase in Turkish role will inevitably be in one way or another at the expense of Russia. So therefore, this new idea of Turkic world, this new idea, the Turkey's renewed interest or revived interest, increased interest in South Caucasus, Central Asia, Turkic world, will, I think, inevitably induces the competitive dynamic of Turkish-Russian relationship more than its cooperative dynamics. Yes, the both sides will prove to manage this relationship, but I think the both sides will be extremely cautious and careful about each other's steps. Let's not forget that Turkey is engaging not only economic cooperation, it's engaging with the security cooperation with increasing number of the countries in the region. The Azerbaijan is the case point, but you also see right now increasingly with Uzbekistan. So such kind of Turkey's interest or footprint in the security or defense or strategic arena of the Central Asia and South Caucasus will induce more Russian suspicion and more Russian concerns towards Turkey's activities there. And I think the more we see Russia feels insecure, which it does now after the war, probably Russia feels more insecure and also more cautious about its role in the region, the more Russia can become predictable if it feels that it is being left out of an emerging regional picture. And this is one thing that I think Turkey will bear in mind, even though it wants, a closer connectivity with the Turkic world. Obviously, implicitly that means, in a sense, like in an anti-Russia or at least reducing the Russian role there. But it will be also very conscious how this will affect Turkish-Russian relationship, because in the end, this is a multifaceted relationship that Russia has many cards to play against Turkey. And the question of dependency or interdependency in Turkish-Russian relationship is not a static one, it's a dynamic one. It's being shaped by each passing day. And very finally, like, what are the new actors that we should be looking at? I think one of them is obviously what I mentioned, the growing momentum or interest in the idea of the Turkic world and the different cooperative and cooperation framework that are emerging from it. Like, for instance, right after, during the Nagorno-Karabakh war, we saw a very interesting dynamic, both Turkey and Israel strongly supporting the Azerbaijani side militarily by providing defense equipment. So there was an interesting trilateral framework emerging there in a decidedly anti-Iran fashion that was there. But for me also, I have a question, which is important. Are we going to see more interest from places like India to be present in the geopolitics of the area? Because in the end, India is increasingly more important Asian actors and probably will have more interest in how the Euro-Asian space is being shaped.
Right, thank you. And Natalie, final word to you before I close.
Thank you, Lubitsa. I'll try to be quick. There is an interesting shifting dynamic in the South Caucasus and relations with Russia. Russia's traditional ally in South Caucasus has been Armenia. Today, what we see is that Armenia probably is the biggest lobbyist for greater European Western influence in the region, for reasons that we understand. That is correlated with Georgia's shift, which has been traditionally the most pro-Western state in the region, which is now is diversifying its foreign policy priorities, and that means pivoting away from the West. What is paradoxical in relations with Georgia is that Georgia now is about to be a candidate state of the EU, so it has the closest relations it could have imagined with the EU, and simultaneously the warmest relations with Russia for a very long time. So that is a kind of a paradox. With Azerbaijan, which has always been very careful balancing different actors, including Russia and the EU, clearly Azerbaijan has benefited from Russia's absence in the war over Nagorno-Karabakh. But I wouldn't say, you know, Azerbaijan-Moscow relations at the moment are quite good, but I wouldn't say that Azerbaijan is the force that is pushing to bring greater Russian presence. Following what Galip said, I think the interest there is to promote and support Turkish increasing presence in the region. So really the two actors still to watch there are Russia and Turkey. And despite the sort of growing, despite the candidate status of Georgia, your EU and the Western footprint, in my view, is diminishing. And that also includes the question on Anaklia that Stefan had asked. It is very interesting to see who gets the rest of the investment in Anaklia, because before it was the US interest, and there's been a lot of speculation that one of the reasons why it fell through, okay, the plan was not great, let's put it that way, but one of the reasons was that, you know, let's keep Americans out of the Black Sea. It will be very controversial for it to go to Russians in Georgia. Safer bet for political reasons is China, but that would again once again demonstrate this kind of multi-vectoring of Georgia's outlook and pivoting away from the West.
Great, thank you very much. We're a little over time, so apologies for that. So what I take from today's meeting is no one likes grand plans anymore. So while a lot of the buzzwords resonate, kind of connectivity and diversification, so a lot of the Middle Corridor Initiative buzzwords resonate, there isn't any sort of grand scheme happening on the ground, although bits and pieces are progressing, but very much all the players have a very careful risk and cost-benefit analysis going on in any of the projects they undertake. So it will definitely be something to watch, including the kind of emergent actors that we discussed. So you can be sure that we will keep watching it. And if there's anything interesting happening, there will be an event on it or a publication on it. So please keep an eye on the Chatham House website. And yeah, so all that remains for me to say is that we were on the record today. So please remember that. And please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists, thanking my colleagues Melania, Liza, and Matt for running the event very successfully in the background. We couldn't have done it without them. And thank you to all of you for joining. We had nearly 200 people. So yeah, thank you very much. And my colleagues and I look forward to seeing you at future events.